Thanks everybody for coming and expressing your interest in learning more about what we're doing in construction. I'm Tracy Douglas, the Industry Marketing Manager for Construction. I will be presenting with my coworker Anthony Governanti. He's the Technical Marketing Manager for Construction. He'll spend the time really diving into the products and giving you the demo of the products and what's new for FY13. And Dace Campbell is with BIM Builders. He's the Director of Innovation, and he's going to give you some real use case examples of how he's using our technology in the field. So I just want to kick it off talking about giving you an overview of what you expect to see in our session today. What's really important for contractors is the evolution of building information modeling and really the information that's in building information modeling and the flow of that information to help execute work in construction. We'll also talk about how Autodesk is investing in our desktop applications in order to carry out those workflows and providing more enhancements to work directly for the contractor. From a design perspective, engineers and architects, they really use building information modeling to evaluate the built asset and the performance of that asset. For contractors, it's really about using BIM for the actual process and how they build it. And lastly, we'll talk about how we're moving that information in BIM, the value of that information into the field through our cloud and mobile applications. So just to have a little bit of context of the environment that contractors are in, it's really a transformational time in construction. There's a lot of constraints that are happening that are forcing the need to change the way contractors are doing business. They can no longer continue to operate that they're doing now, a very wasteful industry and not very productive, and they're really looking to ways that they need to change that. The things that are driving that, first and foremost, is competition. The current economic environment that we've been in, a lot of you guys have been writing about it, is that times are tough. Things are slow. We've had declines. We're starting to see an uptick of that, but it's going to be a moderate recovery with that. We're also seeing tighter financing that's happening that's restricting that. And because of that, contractors are really reporting lower margins on their work. And then on top of that, there's governments and private sectors that are mandating the use of BIM. So if you add all that together, it's really about constraining the environment for contractors and who's going to still be, playing in the game if they're not using BIM in the future. Also aligned with using BIM is driving the force of alignment and just how contractors and designers and engineers can get more involved early in the process to share information. And we're seeing a lot of evolution of project delivery methods that are happening, like IPD or design build. And we're also seeing contractors really stepping up and saying, we really see the value in this, and whether or not counterparts are actually using it, we want to use it, and they're driving it and setting that mandate within their supply chain so that they're using it. And lastly, lean. As I talked about from a competitive standpoint, productivity, they are trying to work on managing that waste element, not just from a material standpoint, but also rework. I mean, there's just a lot of things that they can streamline the efficiencies of if they're doing things like building information modeling or prefabrication. So to dive a little bit deeper about what that landscape is for the construction industry, contractors' business is very project-centered, and there's a lot of constraints around the project that's being executed. So they really need to be thinking about the scope of the project and the cost and the time involved in that project. And all of these things are interrelated. So if there's a change in scope, it's obviously going to affect the change in the time and the cost. So ultimately what construction is all about is mitigating that risk that's inherent in this process and really maintaining quality and safety along those lines. And so when you think about technology and how contractors are using technology today, a lot of them are well versed in the stack you see here on the left. They have their estimating applications that they have in place, scheduling applications, they have back office systems, and they also have ERP systems. And really what Autodesk wants to do is to work with them to leverage that information they have there on the left side of the stack and think about the project environment that they're working in and put BIM in the center of that and use that information to the value of the processes they execute throughout life cycle of the project execution. So first we're seeing the use of building information modeling in business development. They're using our modeling tools like Revit to really, and also Navisworks, to demonstrate how the work will actually be executed. So it's not just about, when BIM first evolved, I don't know if you've ever heard the term called Hollywood BIM, and people saying, I do BIM, but it's really about not just the fact that you can show, but you actually demonstrate the actual work and the progress that's taking place. From a constructability standpoint, contractors need to know just not how the building's going to be designed, but if they can actually build it as it's designed. And so they need that greater level of detail, the means and methods to actually execute that work. And lastly, it's quantification. It's about getting their hands on the quantities and the cost information earlier in the process and more often throughout the process. And they could do that with both Revit and QTO within Autodesk. And then we get into coordination and planning logistics. There's a lot going on throughout the construction process. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of activities that are happening. And there's a lot of players involved. And they need to be able to organize that and coordinate all that together. And so Navisworks is a great tool to do that. Obviously, we integrate with a lot of different products out there, and so we can integrate models and really aggregate them together so that we can look at what the different environments are, whether it's the architect's model or the subcontractor's models and things like that, and really coordinate those things. And then also looking at from a planning and logistics standpoint and be able to sequence work and plan out the activities that are happening. And then we get into fabrication. And we're seeing a lot of that happening. This past year, we had our acquisition of MAP, and so there's the applications that they've developed that really address the systems fabrication work, and so contractors are starting to use that more. But also, we're seeing an evolution of contractors using Inventor for form work, for things like curtain walls and even little intricacy millworks and things like that in the interiors, where they can actually, start in Revit, look at the landscape of where they might put something in, then they'll actually model it in Inventor and they'll bring it in, and then it can be integrated also within Navisworks to actually show the execution of how that's going to be done from a sequencing standpoint. So a lot of interesting things happening there. And then also from a field execution standpoint, how they're able to take this information into the field and use it and see it firsthand, and then lastly handing it over to the owner and them extending the value of BIM for operations and maintenance. And so all this information that's in BIM is being connected through workflows and activity that filter all through these things that can actually go back into those back office systems. And Autodesk doesn't do this alone. We know that we have our core strengths in these 6 areas that you see around the wheel, mainly through our AutoCAD and Revit and Navisworks, Inventor. Those core softwares and the way that they work together really help with all these phases, but we also need to be able to partner with other applications to extend the use. So from a quantification standpoint, we need to be able to extend that to estimating and really integrate with other applications like Sage Timberline, for example. From a planning and logistics standpoint, you'll hear Anthony talk about how we can actually start building schedules in Navisworks, but we also can import other scheduling applications like Microsoft Project, Asta, and Primavera. And then from a field execution standpoint, we partner with Bella Systems so that we can have Navisworks on tablets and extend that information of BIM into the field. And then from a handover standpoint, we partner with FM Systems and Maximo. So now I'm going to turn it over to Anthony. So he's going to do a deeper dive into some of these workflows that you've just seen and what's new in FY13.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. So as she mentioned, let's take a little bit closer look at the technology, and what I'm going to do is highlight the new features that apply to the construction world in our solutions, but we're going to do that by framing it around some key workflows that we also want to show at the same time. So the first part of those workflows that we're going to look at, the first workflow to look at, is constructability. So what is constructability? It's that act of taking our design information and adding the construction detail and information that we need in order to execute that project in the field. It's really the start of the process when we start working with information models. Here we're going to take a look at how we acquire and review those design models, and we're going to use applications like AutoCAD, Autodesk Revit, which I'm sure you've probably heard about already, but really the important piece for Autodesk Revit in the construction space is it consolidates those 3 applications they always needed before, the Revit MEP, the Revit structure, and the Revit architecture into a single package. This is huge for the construction space, and it really allows them to get just to the information they need and don't have to worry about managing the software as much as they can really focus on the process. Okay, so that's a big takeaway here. We'll also look at how Buzzsaw and Vault fit into that a little bit, and then of course Navisworks, when we start to review that design information and figure out what we need to do to it to address the constructability side. Moving through the workflow, once we understand the model, now let's go in and start to create that construction detail. And so we'll look at some of the enhancements to the part functionality that we have in the modeling environment, in this case Autodesk Revit. We'll also look at a brand new workflow where we can use linked models in order to get a constructability model built that doesn't have all the overhead that our design intent model has. And that's a very key enhancement for this year. We'll then move on into preparing that information and how we're going to either export it or get it into our Navisworks environment and really start to create that constructability model I mentioned. And then move into actually organizing and managing that data, really setting ourselves up for downstream activities. This is where we're going to have a model that's ready to go for coordination, for sequencing, for quantification, and for all the planning and logistical things we'll see in a little bit. Okay? So there's a snapshot of that workflow. One of the things that I feel really important that we need to hit home here is the idea of also using our collaboration and data management tools or the cloud when we go through these workflows. The idea being that when I get that information and when I continue to share and manage that information, I need to do that with a larger group usually, right? It can be subcontractors, it can be distributed teams within my own organization. The data management and collaboration solutions from Autodesk, i.e. Vault and Buzzsaw, are great tools for doing that because you can accurately and securely share that information with just the people you want it to be shared with. Okay? The cloud also plays in that, where we have now Autodesk 360. Anybody can sign up for an Autodesk 360 account. They don't have to have our software. So now we have a great cloud-based solution for sharing information. So I feel that that's going to be used certainly in a lot of cases where I just need to get information quickly shared around. And then, of course, we have the data management solutions. So as we look at, I'm going to go ahead and play some videos here just because of the timing today. We see our great friend Buzzsaw here where we have access to that design intent model on the construction side. We're going to go ahead and download that. Some enhancements to Buzzsaw this year with the ability to run on multiple web platforms. Here's the big new feature. We can come into a Navisworks and load in our Revit file. So now I can natively read that RVT file into my Navisworks environment. Why is that important? Well, now I can quickly get an understanding of what information I have. In this case, we'll look at a floor, a slab, and we'll see that it's one big monolithic piece. Well, that's not how I would construct it. I need to cut that piece down into the pour sequences. So already, just by quickly loading that model, I can start to see constructability needs. Same thing on the architectural shell. I look at that wall. It's just one big thing. So I need to break that down into the individual parts and components in order to build that. Now that we've got a good idea of what that model has, let's get into actually doing some constructability modeling. Here is the enhancement to that workflow. I'm actually in a clean Revit environment, and I'm going to link in this case, a small example of a design model. When I link that in, I can then reach into that link and create the parts I need for constructability from the original model. That gives me kind of a break from that model. I get the information I need, but I don't have to worry about editing the original model. Once I have that information in here, I can start to do things that are really apply to the construction workflow. The first thing is I'm going to set up some parameters that I can apply to the construction data. In this case, a crane number, and then eventually a pour sequence. So these are project parameters that are specific now to my model that I'm referencing from the design model that are going to help me down the line when I go to sequence, when I go to coordinate, when I go to plan out how my project is going to be built. So here I've created one for pour sequences, created one for a crane number. Now I can pick those objects that I did link in from the other file and start to add those parameters to it. So I think a really nice piece where we're already starting to add construction detail to our design model, but we're able to do it in an environment where we don't have to deal with all the documentation overhead. Maybe there's things that have been modeled that we don't really care about yet. Fine detail or furniture, those type of things. So a really nice way. Now that I've got that, I'm going to go ahead and break up the model. And another enhancement for this year is the ability to merge parts. So now I've merged this corner. That would be actually poured together with formwork instead of two separate walls like the architect had it. And you'll see that as I continue to split these parts up, that merge is adhered to. Okay? Great part of the workflow here. Let's look at a different example. I'm going to take this one wall and continue to break it down into some smaller parts for the pours. But as I do so, I have some new options over here where I can go ahead and add a gap to that division. In other words, maybe it's an expansion gap. Well, Beyond this expansion gap, I can also add a profile to that piece. So now I can have a channel in between those two pieces. Maybe it's how I key those walls together or to chase for conduit. I'll come in and do the exact same thing when I'm modeling out the part horizontally. So I'll go ahead and cut my line here. Again, I'll give it a gap. And in this case, I've got a different profile. I've got a stepped angle. So this is much closer to a real construction detail that we may have as we start to pour these walls out. I can also hide that part, and that's going to help me with detailing as I go in to do an assembly detail or a fabrication detail. Let's apply that same thing to a wall that might have some penetrations. Here maybe we have some shapes for objects going through that wall, a pipe, a duct, a cable tray. Okay, I'll go ahead and add that. I can go ahead and say turn those other shapes off. And another new feature, I have these grips. So now I can grip edit those shapes to be exactly the size and gap that I need to be going around that piece that's going through that wall. And if I happen to do it wrong, no problem. There's a nice little reset button up here. I can get back to the original shape as well. So I think very powerful tools to really enhance how we're doing our constructability modeling. Another great new feature in Navisworks now, we have the grid and level lines coming in from a Revit file. So I can have a tooltip live on the screen at that intersection, and I can see exactly where I am spatially in the model. That's going to help us with all of our sequencing and coordination down the line. I add in more Revit files here, append in those files, and now I can start to build that constructability model and use those great navigation tools that we have in a Navisworks environment where I can literally walk through my space and get a feel for what that project actually is virtually. Make sense? So some great enhancements there for the constructability part of the construction workflow. Now that we've prepared that constructability model, let's now take it into coordination. This is probably the primary reason anybody gets into BIM, right? We need to coordinate. We need to find the problems, find the clashes in our project. Well, what we've done this year is really enhance the coordination to go beyond just finding the clash. We'll look at here how we view and analyze that coordination model. We're doing that in a Navisworks environment. Just visually get a good idea of what's going on with this model and all the different trades we have on site. Then we're going to move in and start to find but also manage those conflicts. So there's some user interface enhancements, but also some functionality that's been added to really make sure that we're not just finding them, we're managing those, and we're taking those into resolution. So it's not just part of it to find the conflicts. That's an important part. But if you don't do anything with the conflicts, you haven't really reaped the rewards. Okay? So that's really an important part of this workflow. And then, of course, we need to prove that we did it, and we need to have some paper trails, if you will. It's all digital now, but of course we need to report that. And that's going to be really important in how we communicate that out to our team as well. Can't forget about our friend here in data collaboration and management side. Again, that information is going to need to flow. It may need to flow in and outside of our organization. That's really where our Buzzsaw, our Vault, and even the cloud tools are going to be very important. Let's now move into actually doing some coordination. First thing I can do is start to look at the building in big chunks. Right here I've got the central spine that's going to be built as part of this. And I can start to peel back the layers. Now I can see just the structure. And as I look at that structure, I'll start to slowly add layers back in. Here I'm going to turn on the floors, then eventually the systems. And I'm visually coordinating. You know, if I had a big problem here, a system sticking out off to the side, I knew that I have a problem either with my coordination or maybe the coordinates. Here I can see visually there's something going wrong. We'll zoom in here. There's some sprinklers outside of the building envelope. So somebody obviously made a bit of an error there. We'll note that and assign that to somebody to take care of. So visual coordination more than anything. But now let's get in and do some real analysis. Brand new interface for the Clash Detective, which is the tool that does all of our coordination. We have the ability to see all of our clashes, and we can roll that list of clashes up so we minimize the use of or maximize the space we have on screen. We also have all the tools we had previously set up here as nice buttons. So everything is right heads up. We don't have to dig down into menus and right click and those type of things. Everything we need is right here. Once we get our clash report going, you'll notice that as I click on things, it kind of zooms out and zooms to it. That's a nice new feature. It gets me some context of what we have. And now we have the ability to display that background in different ways. Let's take a look at here. We see a display settings. This is another panel that can roll up and back, so we save screen space. And we've got things like, I'm going to go ahead and select item 1 or item 2. So instead of just this big red blob on the screen, I can see the original parts and pieces in the space. Here we can see it in context of the file. It was a quick zoom, but it zooms out automatically for us, shows us where it is, and then zooms back in. And then what we do notice here, if I highlight all clashes, we've got a lot of pieces of steel hitting that duct. So we should naturally want to group that together. Great tools that are here to do that. I simply right-click and say group all the clashes. I have a great interface here, a really nice interface. See my level and my grid intersection lines here showing up? So I don't just have a visual of the grids, I can also see them in a tabular view as well. I know exactly where I am in the model. We're going to go ahead and assign that clash, right? A button right there for us to do it. And now I'm saying to the mechanical team, let's take care of this. There's a problem with this duct. We can now use our switchback technology, which was new to the solution last year, but is now enhanced even further, that we can be switching back to that Autodesk Revit instead of having to pick the individual components. See that it gives us a nice view. It already selects the part that we're having the problem with. So when I go to a view, there it is. I know exactly what piece I need to work on. My colleague down the hall, Armando, doesn't really like this, but I'm going to change that 32-inch duct to a 10-inch duct. I'm sure somebody else will be able to do the analysis later. Really for demonstration purposes, right? We want to make sure that we're getting the clearance we need there. I obviously would go through and have the designer do that, right? So I brought it in. We can see visually that conflict has been resolved, but sometimes that's not going to be possible. Let's go ahead and rerun the test, and now we can see that it truly is a resolved conflict. They do not clash anymore. I can manage that process here by having these tags. Has it been reviewed? Has it been resolved? Is it complete? And once I do that, that metadata goes into a report. So now I have that digital asset that tracks everything we've done. We see why we did it, we see how we did it, and we see who did it. Now we're creating that report. Once I've got that report exported from the product, we can bring it up in any browser here. And again, we see a snapshot of the clashes, and we can see all the metadata about it. Who owns it, who fixed it, when did we tell them to fix it, so on and so forth. So it's really that idea of coming back, not just finding the clashes, but really managing and resolving the clashes. And that is a big enhancement to the workflow for our construction customers. Moving on into planning and logistics. What is planning and logistics? That's the idea of doing our sequencing, doing our 4D analysis, and now 5D analysis as well, and the scheduling that we may need to do. So let's take a look at that. We'll come in, we'll do some preliminary sequencing, looking at some of the enhancements for attaching elements to a schedule. Once we have that, we'll also add in some cost information. So now we get to that fifth dimension of money, of cost, and be able to see an analysis on what money is being spent on site as things are starting to be built. We'll also come into some new interface and introduce now that there's some real good scheduling tools right in Navisworks. So we can begin to do a preliminary schedule right here in our environment and then move it over into our advanced tools like a Primavera or Microsoft Project. And then last but not least, we're going to do some logistical coordination, looking at it at a very micro level. Here's a curtain wall being built. Here's where we're going to lay down our materials, etc. Again, we can't forget about our friends here in the collaboration and data management. It's still a very important part where we share that information in a secure and controlled way. So here we are in Navisworks. We have a brand new interface for Timeliner, which is the scheduling interface. We have all of our tasks set up for us, plus some new functionality, all in buttons that are really easy to use right here at the top of the interface. We're going to add new tasks, and here's the new one for this year. We can use indenting and outdenting. Why is that important? Now we can set up a hierarchy in our tasks. We can have one task under another, so the dates are dependent on each other, and that's really a scheduling mechanism that we haven't had in the past. I've gone ahead and done some of that indenting and now I'm starting to look at the individual components. I need to attach my model elements to a task. Brand new for this year is the ability to drag from the model space and drop them into the tasks. So here I've got my steel, I'm grabbing that, I'm dragging that over, and simply just dropping that onto the fabrication part of the task. So really good. In this case, I'm doing very high level. I just want to get an idea if my broad stroke dates are right for this part of the building. So we're going ahead and assigning those elements very quickly. And let's just play the 4D sequence. Very raw here. See big chunks of things showing up. We wouldn't naturally build it that way. It's kind of hard to build multiple floors at once. But it gives me a good baseline. I know I'm going in the right direction. I don't see any huge problems. Now let's come over and start to add in some cost information. And you can do this at any point that you have the schedule. Now we open up and we have the ability to do material, labor, equipment, and subcontractor costs. We'll add those values into the tasks, into that schedule, and we'll see the result of those here in a minute when we run the sequence. Now that I have a good baseline schedule, let's export that out to the MS Projects XML, which is a standard format that we can bring into MS Project. Here is MS Project. We'll go ahead and bring in that preliminary information. And now we can see that exact same schedule that we created over in Navisworks. Let's now add in the detail that we do in the tool that's really geared towards this. I have my Gantt chart that follows along with it. Now you can see I've got under foundations, my pile caps, my footings, mobilization of my site, all those type of things. Now that I have that done, I have that connection in there. I'm going to bring that exact same information back in and update the schedule I have in my Navisworks environment. Interesting to note, we support the latest version of Microsoft Project as well as the latest version of Primavera, and ASTA is now a file format we'll support as well. So now we have our full schedule. Let's go ahead and run that simulation. And it's going to end quickly here, but I just want to point out, here are my costs that are running up and my total. So I'm seeing cash flow at the same time I'm seeing my sequence go through. That's the 5D analysis. As we bring it into the logistical side, let's get a little bit more detailed. We're looking at a material laydown area, temporary access road, an exclusion zone for safety where that forklift's going to work, our temporary works, and then the physical properties of putting that curtain wall together. And we can see what day it is and what percentage of the task should be done by that day. So that's some of that logistical coordination. So some great enhancements in here that allow us to work with scheduling and get the planning and logistics done for our site. Last but not least is fabrication. Because of time, we don't have a video for this, so we'll just talk at it at a very high level. We mentioned earlier that we have that acquisition of MAP software. It's going to be a very important piece for contractors and really the subs that they work with from an MEP perspective. But also we have the ability of being able to just do some contextual analysis for something. In this example, we're looking at a formwork for a poured concrete column that also doubles as scaffolding. And this is something that we modeled out quickly in a Revit and moved around our space for coordination capabilities. But now let's go in and get into modeling the actual components. This is where an Autodesk Inventor starts to play. We get very detailed on that component and everything about that scaffolding and that formwork. We can move that back into our Navisworks environment to now have the real piece of data moving around and coordinating and scheduling. And then from there we can see also how we can pull out detailed documentation and installation, layout drawings and or instructions, right? So a very important part. We even have a technology called an Inventor Publisher that allows us to digitally hand over what that component looks like and how it would physically be built in the field through animations. So some pretty powerful parts of the fabrication story. Of course, we can't forget about collaboration and data management as well. We want to make sure that that's part of the story every time, that we're always able to collaborate and share that information. So with that, I'm going to hand it right back over to Tracy, and she'll take us to the rest of the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Anthony. So everything that you just saw Anthony present is available in the Building Design Suite Ultimate Edition. It includes our core modeling applications, the Revit One Box that Anthony talked about and how important that is for contractors. It also has Navisworks and all the features that come with that, QTO, Inventor. So a greatly expanded tool set to help execute all those imperatives that we had around the wheel and also the workflows that Anthony covered. And then additionally, there's the Autodesk 360. So you've heard about it in some of the other sessions about that anywhere access to information and how you can store and share information there. You've also probably heard about some of the rendering and simulation activities that are happening with BIM 360, the future direction within the construction industry that we will be providing services that speak specific to construction as well, and you'll be seeing that in the years to come. So speaking of Autodesk 360, we also see that value of that information in BIM really expanding into cloud and mobile and into the field. It's not just that information is pertinent, and they can use it in reviews and trailers and those kinds of things, and offices to really share that information amongst one another, but to be able to actually put it in the hands of the people who are actually building the work out in the field is becoming more and more critical. So where we're doing that today, some of our contractors are actually using AutoCAD WS so that they can review the models and do some markups and send that information into the cloud to communicate with other parties. And they're doing that where they're able to view DWG files to take it to the next level. They're also using Buzzsaw now. So with Buzzsaw, you can now access native Revit models. And you can't do that in any other application today. So that's huge for the construction industry to actually able to view those native Revit models in a mobile device, whether it be an iPad, iPhone, or Android device. And again, that can be synced up into the Buzzsaw sync and then shared within the vault collaboration area, so where you can store that information behind the vault, or also share the information within Buzzsaw in a very secure environment. Another way that we have invested in the cloud technology for construction is through a recent acquisition that we had with Horizontal Systems last year. And this image that you're seeing here is the Columbia University Campbell Sports Center. And what they did here was the project team actually used Horizontal Systems to manage the visualization process, the design review and coordination process, and clash detection all in the cloud, which is pretty phenomenal. You'll see some exciting stuff coming from Autodesk very soon in the near future with that. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dace Campbell, who's the Director of Innovation at BN Builders. At BN Builders, Dace really is taking things to the next level within his company and really looking at how they can integrate integrated project delivery practices, lean practices, and especially building information modeling. And they're not just doing on a project basis, they really see that as the core of their whole business and doing it throughout all projects that they work on. And you're going to see as he shares some more information about his company and how he's doing that. Dace himself is a licensed architect and has all the great accreditations that come with that. Building Design and Construction also nominated him as a 40 Under 40 Innovator for the AEC space last year. So I'm going to turn it over to Dace.
Thanks, Tracy. And thanks to you guys for sticking with us. I know it's getting to be a long afternoon. I'll get right into it, but I want to just give you a background on BN Builders, and for those of you who might not be familiar, we're a West Coast contractor. We're a mid-sized contractor, headquartered in Seattle. You can see some of our statistics. We typically stick under the $100 million range, which makes us that mid-size. Of course, we're proud of our national awards, but probably more on point here is we're really a collaborative builder. We do a lot of IPD work, a lot of design build work. We try to stay away from hard bid work if we can. We're a technical builder. We do almost half our work in the kind of life science lab arena. We branch out into other markets as well, including healthcare. But really, we try to, if it's complicated and technical, that's for us. Internally, we've got a number of initiatives that we're very proud of course, innovation, community, safety, heavy emphasis on sustainability and learning. As the Director of Innovation, that's where I come in. We really see innovation as kind of a three-legged stool. First of all, we've got IPD, Integrated Project Delivery, that gives us the framework for collaboration. That's what allows us to do so much of what we want to do. We've got a number of lean tools and techniques, a lot of processes from pull planning to prefabrication that allow us to be a more efficient builder. And then finally, or probably first and foremost, is BIM. And to me, BIM is the gateway drug that gets us into collaboration. Once you're doing full BIM, it opens the door to these other things. A little bit about BIM at BNB. We've been using it for a number of years. We apply it pretty much on every job now. We have been recognized locally and nationally. We've been awarded for our program and some of our projects. One thing to kind of focus on here, I guess, is we have a pretty unique approach to BIM in the company. We don't have a BIM department. We don't have a VDC department. I'm the exception. I'm the cheerleader in chief, but BIM takes place on the project sites. Our project engineers and our superintendents learn it and know it. Just like they can operate a schedule or an estimate, they better be able to operate the model. So that's our philosophy, and it's a little bit of a unique take in the construction industry. Stepping back from that, why are we bothering with BIM? We're a caveman industry. We're inefficient, we're unproductive, we're deadly. We haven't seen the productivity gains that other industries have seen from 21st century technology. Unlike manufacturing, we don't invest in a prototype and then see the gains from that investment on an assembly line. Every one of our projects is unique. Our buildings are the prototype. So for us, BIM gives us a chance to do a virtual mock-up or a virtual prototype and get it right before they start swinging hammers in the field. We do this to try and increase confidence and understanding and communication, and we're trying to decrease all the things we're trying to avoid on the job, and BIM does that for us. Or simply put, we want to be in the business of avoiding rework. We would rather build it virtually the first time and pre-work it so that we get it right in the field. Another way to say this would be that BIM is the 21st century equivalent of measure twice, cut once. This is just a little peek into our workflow, talking about kind of the interoperability of all the various software packages we use. The emphasis here is really, Autodesk products really are front and center for us. We rely heavily on Revit and Navisworks. Happy to hear that we no longer have to do the NWC export to go between those. If there's native support, that's a win for us. This is a bit of a shopping list, I guess, of all the various ways we apply BIM on a project. Anything from laser scanning all the way down to prefab. I won't get into this list because I've got a project case study I want to show you that's going to highlight a number of these. But just as important as all the things we're trying to do is the set of protocols we have in place to make it happen. This has been fairly widely published, our rules of engagement for architects and owners. That has led to our own BIM Execution Plan, a nice 50-page document about how to really put this stuff together. Lucky for us, we put our BIM Execution Plan together with Perkins and Will, and the project I want to show you is a job that we did with Perkins and Will. It's the Institute for Systems Biology, or ISB. Some bit of information on that. We put it together, finished it last year. It's a $12 million project in a 4-story building. It's a tenant improvement, so we didn't touch the enclosure really at all. Key point here, it was an 8-month construction schedule. Normally a project this scope and this complexity would be a 10-month schedule. We pushed it to 9, and halfway through the construction, the owner pushed it to 8, which led to all kinds of interesting things that I'll touch on. A couple of kind of technical considerations. It has achieved LEED Platinum status. It's one of the first projects, lab projects, to get LEED Platinum. So it's really heavy emphasis on sustainability in it. A lot of reuse of materials. The MEP systems were a big deal in the building. It was a 4-story building. There was a second-floor tenant that had to stay online while we were doing demolition of MEP systems above, below, and around them. So it was kind of like an open heart transplant, if you will. We had to keep the patient alive while we were taking the building apart. You'll see in some of the graphics there's a pretty bold architectural palette inside of the building, and there was a feature stairs that I'll come back to. Just got a couple of statements kind of from the architect and the owner to kind of set this up. The Perkins and Will definitely used Revit the entire time. They relied on it heavily, and they've really exchanged that model data with us. From our point of view, we leveraged BIM in just about every facet we could think of on the project. And of course, we relied heavily on that Revit model, the source model, to do what we needed to do. So we had a really strong emphasis on collaboration with the architect. From the owner's point of view, they wanted to see how far they could push BIM through the life cycle, not just designing construction, but actually set it up for facilities maintenance and operations. And as I mentioned, they accelerated the schedule, which led to some interesting things. So what I want to do is walk you through kind of a quick top 10 uses of BIM on the project. First and foremost was, and this is somewhat chronological order, the design authoring and visualization. Certainly, Perkins and Will using Revit used a lot of tools like the design options and parametric families to keep up with all the changes to the program during design. What you see here are some of these static images. We took the Revit model and brought it into Navisworks, and during design development, ISB had a staff retreat, offsite staff retreat for their 300 plus staff. And we took the Navisworks model and did a real-time walkthrough stereoscopically. So we had 300 pairs of glasses that we handed out and had popcorn in a movie theater and did a real-time 3D walkthrough and gave the staff a chance to see their project before it was getting built. It led to some great discussions about the design while it was in progress. Of course, we did MEP coordination and clash detection. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about this because any contractor in BIM is doing this. But it is worth noting we did a lot of intense coordination during design and into pre-construction. And we did find about 2,000 clashes, which translates to a rough savings of avoiding 2,000 RFIs. That's a big deal to us. To ask and answer an RFI costs a project team about $500 in real money, just chasing the red tape around. Times 2,000 clashes, that's $1 million savings. On a $12 million job, that is significant. So having reliable clash detection tools really mattered to us. Moving on into quantity takeoffs. We didn't do true 5D as Anthony outlined, but we did a fair amount of takeoffs. In this particular example, during construction, the owner had some changes to the stained concrete, and they wanted to look at some new design options. So we very quickly took the architect's Revit model and did some quantity takeoff, and it could present some real-time estimates about which direction did they want to go. Also, I mentioned it was a LEED Platinum job. Platinum means you've got to go after every point possible, and every point counts. And the material takeoff that was involved was pretty intense. So we went after this building reuse credit. I'm not sure how familiar you are with this, but it's basically quantifying all the non-structural components in the building that are reused. So every wall, every door, every ceiling, every finish, every piece of casework has to have its area measured if you're reusing it in the building. So for us to do that manually would have sent a couple of project engineers out to the project for a couple of weeks just taking measurements and quantifying the surface area of everything that was reused. Instead, we took the Revit model, kind of creative use of filters and phases, and were able to extract between what was demoed, what was saved, and what was new, and extract quantities in just a couple of hours, essentially, for the backup documentation for that lead point. So, the difference between a couple of weeks of work or a couple of hours, you can see the savings there. Now we're moving closer into construction. We're still calling it shop drawings, which is a misnomer because they're really shop models at this point. And we gave the design background to our fabricators and our detailers. And in this case, you can see the steel, the glass, some casework. They use their own modeling packages, detailed it up, sent it back to us for review with the architect. And we found by doing a model-based review, we probably cut our review time by about half. And from there, especially the steel fabricators had a program that was directly compatible with the Revit model that allowed them to automate the 2D shop drawings, the fabrication drawings from there. Moving on into constructability review, this is, to me personally, the heart of why a contractor is involved in BIM. This is our chance to study our means and methods and preserve the architect's design intent. We typically do a thorough constructability review if we're doing a ground-up project. We want to look at the enclosure since there's usually so much involved in keeping a building dry. This was a tenant improvement. We didn't touch the enclosure. So instead, we actually kind of had the reverse. The cage rack washers were essentially room-sized industrial dishwashers. So we had essentially rain inside of the building in these units, and we had to keep the rest of the building around it dry. These cage rack wash units were taller than the ceiling and wider than the room that they were going into. So we had some pretty interesting soffit and flashing conditions as we tried to protect the architecture around it. There's no way we could have studied this and really resolved the material transitions if we didn't have a model to study from. Moving on, now we really are getting into the construction. As I mentioned, the owner accelerated the project schedule, and we really had no chance to get it wrong. We absolutely had to get it right. So we took the architect's model and developed a lot of custom drawings that we knew our field crews could work from the dimensions we gave them and color-coded it in a way that they could understand. So, from partition layout to these We refer to them as our lightsaber light fixtures. We had developed these custom layout drawings. Again, we didn't change the architect's information. These are contract documents. We don't ever want to change that. But we could filter the database and color code it in a way that made sense to our guys in the field, so that they're not doing math and subtracting 5/8 of an inch off of one side of a chip of a partition. Revit can do those calculations. Let's give them drawings that they can use specific to their task. And of course, these are drawings the architect would never have dreamed of that we would need. They just outline design intent. It's up to us to resolve the means and methods. I want to touch on the feature stair here just for a minute. You can see it here built out. It's adjacent to this feature glass wall, this art glass wall. This glass had like a 6-week lead time, and it had to go in ahead of the stairs. And just the way the stair was detailed, to install it, they had to do field welding about 1 inch away from this art glass, which means anything that went wrong, that glass would crack and we lose 6 weeks in the schedule. And we already had lost a month based on the owner's wishes. So we knew we had to get this right. So while the glass was in lead time, we took the model, brought it into Navisworks. We got the subcontractors and the detailers model added into Navisworks and really did a thorough 4D visualization of just this one area. And it was a daily visualization for about 2 or 3 weeks, where we'd sit down with the detailers and go through. It's like, how can we shave more time out of this? This isn't good enough. Let's keep optimizing the schedule until we know we get it right. And through a lot of hard work and a little bit of luck, I mean, we put this in without a hiccup at all. It was great. This next use I'm actually going to skip over. I want to come to back to this at the end. It's really talking about bringing BIM, the next 100 yards out of the trailer, out to the job site where the people really can have it in their hands. So I want to touch on, as we kind of wrap up these top 10 uses, our quality control and safety with use of BIM. Vela was mentioned as a strategic partner of Autodesk. Of course, we use Vela on iPads and on our ruggedized field tablets. But on those tablet PCs, we can also load Navisworks. So we can do our QC and everything that Vela offers to do our punch listing and quality control. We can have the model right next to it at the same time, which is really valuable to us to have that kind of primary source of information. And since that time, we've really encouraged Vela to look in that direction, and now they're integrating Navisworks directly in their field BIM application. As far as safety goes, we use the architect's design model and developed a site-specific safety plan, and this happens to be highlighting the hazardous work we had on the roof. I know it probably doesn't mean a lot to you here, but the subcontractors being brought on board and getting their safety orientation, it's meant a lot to them to be able to visualize the work 3-dimensionally and not just see a crayon sketch that the superintendent would have put together on the trailer wall. Really valuable when it's in this critical work. And then lastly, the turnover documents. Like I said, the owner was really interested in seeing what they could do with BIM beyond construction. So we handed over the entire model, all MEP systems, all in. We did that through Navisworks, and there's a lot of data in this model. So we used the Navisworks selection sets and configured it in a way that the building engineers could either sort by level or by system, a couple of different hierarchies to help them sort the data and give them a fighting chance of actually finding the information they needed. Right now, the building engineers are using it just as a visual reference, but they're currently starting to stitch it together with their own O&M software to do that kind of true 6D BIM-based operations and maintenance. So with that, just a closing thought from our point of view where we see BIM going, and this is as much directed to Autodesk as anything about where we see the focus going in the next couple of years. To us, it's all BIM all the time. I mean, we're almost there on some of our projects, and it's just a matter of time before it's that way on industry-wide. If that's true, though, there's still a number of hurdles and frontiers that need our attention. Model sharing, of course, we do it out of a courtesy and by reference only, but there's very little in terms of legal enforcement mechanisms to say that model is the contract document. We're looking for that to change in the next couple of years, and new standard agreements are coming out that allow that. Culturally, the difference between the haves and the have-nots with BIM, luckily that's going away, but there are still people who don't embrace it, both on the design side and the construction side. And as we get out of this slump in the economy, we're finding the people who aren't in BIM are a dying breed. They're just not going to make it. Regulatory, that's going to be an interesting hurdle, because even if you have architects developing models and contractors using them, the review agencies that stamp plans to give you your building permit, by law they have to stamp a plan. There's nothing in the law that says anything about BIM, so it's going to take some time to change that one. Operationally, I already mentioned, this is where BIM isn't just going to help me as a contractor or help the designer. It's going to help the owner maintain the building for the entire life cycle. That's that sixth dimension, and that's going to be a real frontier for us as an industry in the years to come. And then finally, as I mentioned, I want to come back to the physical frontier, really getting BIM out of the trailer and out to the field where the people who need it the most can have it at their fingertips. There's a number of ways to do that. I kind of outlined a few of them, but I wanted to touch on one in particular, augmented reality. I don't know if that's a term you're familiar with. It's the co-location of virtual and physical data. So what you're seeing here is a snapshot of a project engineer. He's looking at that open stairwell before we built any work in there, and what he's seeing on his tablet in real time is the BIM. So essentially, that becomes a window to the BIM, and you can move around and take a look at details. The architects love it because they can do a lot of pre-visualization at full scale. Our tradespeople love it because they can stick their heads physically, literally into a virtual detail and understand how things are going to go together spatially. And the owners we're finding are very interested in it as well, because it has implications again for operations and maintenance. Think of it as the ultimate stud finder. If you've got a BIM and you've built from it and you can trust it, anything that's covered up behind the walls is something you should be able to reveal, whether it's looking through a window of a tablet or it's a handheld projector or whatnot. So this is a pretty interesting frontier that I think we're going to see a lot of development on in the upcoming years. So with that, Tracy, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dace. That was an excellent way to sum up what we've been talking about today and just the uses of the information in BIM and how it really extends out and how critical you can see this is to the contractor. And just when you think about the risk that they're trying to mitigate, and even the examples that Dace gave about the complexity of the project or the constraints of the schedule and even the constraints of the budget, how much they can leverage BIM to provide that greater predictability and control over project outcomes so that they can be more successful and deliver greater things to the owner. And you've heard from Anthony a great in-depth overview about what we're doing with our investment in our core applications and how we're extending that technology. Some of the things like providing Revit in one box so that contractors can really not have to navigate between different applications. Also the native Revit features that can be traded within Navisworks. Grids and levels to be able to know exactly where you are and the site locations that you're at, and just like the overall streamlining of the process, just the way that we're connecting the technologies to make that a smoother process to be more efficient for the construction industry. And lastly, how we're extending that information into the field through desktop and mobile applications, both now and into the future. So thank you.